I'm Home Healthcare News Editor Andrew Donlan. I will be moderating the discussion today, which should be a good one. We have Rebecca Rawlinson, who's coming to us from Australia, and Megan Ambers, who's coming to us from Ohio. We're all coming together for what should be a great conversation on shifting the point of care and putting worker retention in drive. Rebecca is the Senior Manager of the Healthcare Vertical at Skedulo, and Megan Ambers is the Vice President of Workforce Strategy and Human Resources Innovation at Amedisys. So first, guys, I just want to have you take the floor for a little bit to give a background on yourselves. Rebecca, let's start with you.
Thank you, Andrew. So my name's Rebecca. I do work in Australia, but I'm located currently in Christchurch, New Zealand. Very early in the morning here, so you should see the sun rise as we go. So as Andrew mentioned, I'm the Senior Manager of Healthcare at Skedulo. I do come from a clinical background as an occupational therapist. I have also worked in various caregiver support worker roles. So I've done sort of almost every level of healthcare at this point. The second half of my clinical career was spent more in managerial roles. So I established two services under the newly formed National Disability Insurance Scheme in Australia, and managing services across multiple states in Australia. And then have had various project management roles before moving to Skedulo as a customer success manager and having the opportunity to work with dozens of exceptional healthcare providers across Australia. So thank you very much. I'm happy to be here today.
Great. How about you, Megan?
Perfect. Thanks so much, Andrew. So Megan Ambers, and as mentioned, I'm our Vice President of Workforce Strategy and HR Innovation, and also serving as our interim CHRO at Amedisys. We are a large home health provider in both the hospice, home health, personal care, and palliative lines, and also have some teams that support kind of post-acute hospitalization at home. I've been with Amedisys and in the home health space for the last 4 years, and prior to that have spent over 20 years in human resources, really supporting every facet of HR, but with a strong focus in workforce strategy, the people analytics space, and talent acquisition.
Fantastic. I want to thank Skedulo again for sponsoring this webinar. And also just want to let the audience know that at any point, if you do have questions, please submit those in the Q&A box, and we will try to get to as many of those as possible. First, let's kick it off with you, Megan. So we're all familiar at this point, at least I hope, with the challenges of worker retention in the space. What are the particular challenges that you face, though, at Amedisys, and how are you trying to deal with those?
Sure. So as you said, we're all facing a lot of the same challenges, right? So first, there's just a huge increase in demand and competition in the marketplace for talent. And then when you pair that with what our caregivers are experiencing, which is a strong sense of kind of work-life balance and burnout challenges, the way that we're kind of tackling both of those certainly is making sure that we're focused on what our caregivers need and our value propositioning, and then really looking at how we're engaging our workforce and how we are offering different opportunities to them. So we are pivoting quite a bit in our workforce management, and we are seeing that our caregivers want more control in their scheduling and managing their patient load and being able to have that level of interaction and again, kind of keeping that perspective. So as we look at that shift in our caregiver workforce, we are trying out different ways to schedule our folks, different approaches in scheduling, different work structures that we haven't necessarily offered in the past, and really putting a keen lens on how we can manage that burnout proactively. So keeping an eye on things where we see heavy volatility in clinician demand, where we see changes in week over week scheduling, all of those components to try to help alleviate some of those pieces that we're seeing.
Okay, and Rebecca, obviously the workforce challenges are what they are in the United States for, various amount of reasons. There was a workforce challenge, before the pandemic, and that was exacerbated for a variety of reasons as well. I'm wondering, one thing I wanted to ask you is whether you're seeing the same sort of challenges in Australia.
Yeah, we definitely are. I think, obviously the pandemic has had a massive impact. This workforce is predominantly female, and despite this being a essential service, a lot of workers have had to take time out to homeschool and care for their families during the pandemic, which has left a huge hole in the workforce. And more recently in Australia, Omicron is, just wiping people out at the moment. But even prior to the pandemic, it was heading towards becoming a workforce shortage crisis. There was, people feel underappreciated, underpaid, overworked, all of those classic things that will lead to people leaving a workforce. And then you pair that with the growing demand, aging population, there's more and more people who are needing care and support at the moment. The National Disability Insurance Scheme, which came about in Australia in about 2013, really drove up the amount of services available, which is an amazing thing and has been great for people with disability, but it has meant that somehow we have to staff all of these services. So the demand is bigger than it has ever been before. And then I think, there's things like moral injury, which happens to workers when they feel that they are, they're not able to deliver the level of care that they want to deliver. They feel rushed, they feel compromised in their quality, and this is driving people away from the workforce too. A recent survey showed that I want to refer to my notes here. 1/3 of people aged 18 to 39 are exiting the industry and citing reasons like poor leadership, inadequate pay, lack of carer opportunities. So that's a big one as well. People feeling that there's nowhere to go. They hit a ceiling really quickly, and there's no career path and no kind of investment in professional development. So I think it's a bit of a perfect storm really to create this workforce shortage crisis that we are heading towards in Australia.
Yeah, so it seems like the United States is not alone in that, in terms of what's causing the workforce challenges in home healthcare. So at Amedisys, Megan, what are you guys trying to do to boost workforce retention?
Yeah, so Rebecca hit on a lot of the key factors and things that we're implementing from a strategy perspective. So the first foundation for us is really having a continuous listening life cycle to our population. So we've seen a lot of change in what these drivers are. They've shifted from pre-pandemic to during the pandemic to post-pandemic, and really understanding what our caregivers are telling us and what they're signaling are the reasons why they might be feeling burnt out or have retention risks has been the foundation for success for us. So we listen to our employees continuously. We do solution sessions, we survey at multiple points through their life cycle, and then harness all of that information to guide our strategies. We also have implemented some approaches, as I mentioned, to increase flexibility. So starting to, again, offer different types of shifts and scheduling and worker engagements, as well as expanding into testing the markets and gig labor type structures to really, again, embrace and empower folks to have that flexibility that they need in their career and their personal life. We've also focused heavily on development. So again, that theme of I don't know where I can go with my career. And we have lots of folks who are amazing clinicians and caregivers, but they still want to continue to build their skill set, their clinical distinction, their specializations. And so we've made a large investment into continuing to do that, as well as offering programs and career pathways for folks who may want to get a higher level license or move into leadership and development. And then as we see kind of risks that are identified through that listening, we set up kind of triggers to monitor and intervene. So we proactively identify risks for turnover in our organization, have an intervention strategy in place to work with leaders to identify that we're seeing that type of thing. So I'll give an example. If we see a leader seeing patients over a certain volume every week, we actually notify that leadership team to say there's high likelihood of balance and burnout. So being proactive and using all of that data and insights, as well as supplementing with the pieces we know will help our caregivers see a career with the organization.
Okay, and then Rebecca, on your end, what are you seeing in Australia to mitigate some of these issues? Is there anything innovative that people are doing in order to try to combat the challenges there?
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar to what Megan's described. You know, first and foremost, I think looking at the balance between predictability of work and then flexibility of work. So, you know, using scheduling tools and technology to be able to provide workers with a good work pattern and that predictability so that they can actually work their work around their life and not the other way around to achieve work-life balance. But also acknowledging that, you know, things happen, kids get sick, you know, things happen, and there needs to be an element of flexibility in work that just, there isn't that balance at the moment. So I think bringing in good tools to be able to provide that predictability that the workforce needs. Some really innovative stuff that the government is doing at the moment. They've just started a trial where they are paying sick leave to casual workers. So historically, casual workers did not receive sick leave. And throughout the pandemic, what we saw was that people were still going to work even when they had COVID. And they were doing this out of sense of, you know, urgency in the workplace. They needed workers. There was a worker shortage. They wanted to support the people they cared for. But they also needed the money. You know, they couldn't afford it. And there were government assistance, but it wasn't immediate. So people were going to work even though they were sick because they didn't have access to sick pay. And obviously this puts the people they're caring for at risk, but it also puts them at risk. You know, they're fatigued, it impacts their mental health and their physical well-being. So paying casual workers sick leave, I think it's going to be a very interesting journey to watch to see how that impacts long term. The other thing the government is doing is they are paying people in the aged care workforce a twice yearly bonus of $800. And this is an incentive to keep people in this workforce. You know, it's a pretty, yeah, it doesn't go deep enough to what we really need to be for people to be satisfied, but it's a start, and I think it's certainly an incentive to stay in that area. You know, the government is also investing in worker development and making sure that workers have access to professional development so that they are skilled adequately to do the job, which is a big component. And I think as well with that, you get professional fulfillment, which is something that's lacking. People will feel invested in this industry if they are able to get something out of it. And then I think leadership. This is probably the most important one to me, is that there needs to be an investment in leadership. So we need to have leaders who thrive in a changing environment, but who are also able to have really comprehensive conversations around health and well-being, around, you know, recognizing the signs of burnout, talking to their workers about good mental health, and, you know, recognizing that the role of a leader is really to invest in the people that they're supporting. So I think that's something that's really lacking at the moment. You know, leadership is more than making sure that a person is where they need to be at the right time and that they're performing. There needs to be compassion from leadership, and I think that will help to keep people in the workforce if they feel connected and they feel supported by their leadership.
And Rebecca, just a quick follow-up. What is who is considered a casual worker in Australia?
So a casual worker is someone who's not on a permanent contract. Okay. So we have, particularly in 2013, when the National Disability Insurance Scheme came around, there was this kind of big shift towards casual workers where they might work, you know, 10 hours at this organization, 10 hours at that organization. So there's a lot more fluidity in their work, but they also, by being a casual employee, you kind of compromise on some of the benefits that you receive as a permanent employee, such as.
Yeah, absolutely. So like part-time workers or even gig workers in the United States. Just a reminder, I said this while I was muted, and also thank you to Bridget and Alexis for letting me know that I was muted in the Q&A function. You can use that Q&A box to ask questions throughout this, if you do have them for Rebecca or Megan. But so in terms of the scheduling role, the role scheduling plays in this equation, we've already gotten into it a little bit, but I do want to delve further. Megan, you know, how much of a role does that scheduling aspect play, and why is it so important when it comes to recruiting, retention in today's day and age?
Yeah, so scheduling is critical, right? So we have talked a little bit about how the dynamic of the worker has changed and really being able to support what people are willing to commit to, right, from a time and availability perspective, but then also ensuring that we are addressing the needs of our patients and continuing to deliver quality of care and continuity of care. So that scheduling piece is fundamental to our success, whether that is from a patient-facing lens or a caregiver clinician-facing perspective. As we look at scheduling, a couple of things that I would call out, right? We have seen and can quantify where those changes in scheduling volatility or fluctuations in workload really do drive turnover for us. So we've been able to quantify that and proactively manage to that to help aid in retention of our caregivers. The other piece is really creating an environment where there's transparency into scheduling has been an evolving shift that we've seen. So folks want to be able to, one, see their schedule, react, and shift that as appropriate or have some ability to control that as needed, and also have the opportunity to pick up extra work if they have that type of flexibility. So that's been a big shift for us, is in how do we communicate where we might have needs that are beyond our normal core scheduling and make that accessible in real time to our caregivers. Beyond that, we really are focused on trying to understand our patterns and how we can create more flexibility in our workforce. So keeping that forward lens to what dynamic shifts we're seeing in those workforce patterns and scheduling patterns, and really then heavily leveraging technology, right? So making sure that we have tools and resources that are proactively mitigating risks in terms of overscheduling, changes in volatility, factors that we need to look at, for example, traffic patterns, commute times, mileage distance between patients' homes. All of those things are really, really critical for us to be able to drive a different caregiver and patient outcome as we think about scheduling and where it's moving to. And then the only other thing I'd add there is, sometimes when we think about scheduling, we think about our traditional labor pool, right? So our core employee foundation. And as that workforce dynamic changes, we also need the flexibility to bring in that non-traditional labor and the gig workers into that scheduling platform and into our entire workforce blend.
Yeah, no doubt. And Rebecca, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, as Megan pointed out, the balance between being able to establish work patterns and that predictability, but being agile enough to be responsive to the nature of changes that happen in this work. But I think, and Megan, you explained that so well, so I think I won't go any further into that, but I think that something else that technology affords us in scheduling is the ability to match the worker and the patient appropriately. So having the right person for the job, and that may mean qualifications or meeting certain vaccination criteria, or it can be skills. So making sure that the person is adequately skilled. And I think a scheduling tool does that so well, and that's so important in scheduling. And then also, I think particularly in Australia, now that the worker pool is smaller than it ever has been before, and the demand for work is bigger than it ever has been before, we're pulling people from different parts of businesses, for example. So we have this example where a worker may traditionally work in a location setting, so a residential type setting. And then we have a separate work pool that works in the community, and they're kind of the ones that are driving around the community, going to see people in their homes. But because we have a shortage of workers, we need visibility over everybody. I want to see all of the workers as one big work pool. So I think scheduling plays a really important role there, where you need to have visibility over what everybody is doing at all times, so that you can call on them if you need to. And so that's where technology comes into this. Technology provides us with the ability to be responsive and be reactive in our scheduling, which is essential.
Yeah, so how well is technology integrated in Australia? Obviously, Here in the US, it's more and more it's being integrated. You know, providers like Amedisys are probably on the cutting edge of this, but how well integrated is it in Australia?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the last 10 years has been a big, steep kind of change in the technology space and a digital transformation. And that was because we did introduce this government reform, which basically meant that organizations who had been largely not-for-profit, had government kind of block funding in the past, were now having to think and operate more like a for-profit business. And so there was this big kind of sweep of digital transformation. Everybody was bringing in quoting technology, you know, invoicing. There needed to be technology basically from quote to invoice and everything in between. So time and attendance, scheduling. So it's been a very steep learning curve, but I would say 10 years on, you know, it's fairly well integrated. Most workers are very, very familiar and comfortable with having a mobile device that they kind of check in or clock in and out of. They would use it to maybe update their client or patient's information, case notes, progress notes. So it is pretty well integrated. You know, and I would pair that by saying that there is somewhat still a mistrust of technology, particularly in the healthcare space. In my role at Skedulo, I meet so many wonderful schedulers or people who are in the role of rostering and organizing staff. And I am constantly fighting the battle against the spreadsheet because there's this want and desire to go back to what they know and trust. And I understand that, you know, there's a long way to go before we have this complete reliance on technology. And the same with workers. You know, for years we told them, put your phone away. You know, you don't have your phone in the workplace. And now we're sort of saying, well, now you need to use your phone to do all of these tasks. So it's a bit of a 180, and it's something that, you know, for a workforce who's so, you know, are in the work because they enjoy human interaction and they want to be hands-on and fully focused on the care that they're providing. It's definitely a shift in mindset. So I would say that, you know, technology is pretty well integrated in Australia, but there's still a long way to go. And I would also just finish off by saying, I think it's incredibly important that we keep in touch with that balance of technology and human touch, that we don't overreach when it comes to technology, because coming back to, you know, why people are in this workforce, it's because they are empathetic, it's because they're compassionate, and they want to be engaged with the people they're supporting. And we have to make sure that technology doesn't interfere with that. It has to be a supporting role. It has to be there to lift them up and enable them, but not interfere with their ability to do their job.
Absolutely. And yeah, Megan, can you dig in a little bit more of what you guys specifically are doing at Amedisys?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Rebecca's point around really technology as an enabler is critical as you're thinking about anything that you might implement for your organization or as you're looking at tool selection. So as we think about using technology to coordinate care for our patients, there's a number of different facets. So as we start with just, you know, basic care management, we have a patient management system. All of our clinicians are fully mobile, and really use that system, one, to kind of be the central housing of our scheduling, but also our systems of record for all patient documentation, the ability for care teams to consult and review patient notes, status, and be able to react pretty responsively to any changes that we're seeing in the patients. We also, as we think about kind of technologies that's coordinating for care, obviously heavy expansion into the telehealth support and virtual monitoring. So again, using technology again to empower our caregivers to have that connectivity to their patients in a different way that they didn't really have as much exposure to or opportunity to pre-pandemic. And then really starting to embrace where we can use predictive sciences to help aid in all of those things, right? So embedding AI in our scheduling practices and our workforce management strategies, and using that to, again, guide our strategy going forward or understand where we may need to pivot from a planning and management perspective.
Okay, we have one question from the audience here that I'm sure you guys can answer. Are home conditions, pet allergies, et cetera, taken into consideration? Are home conditions evaluated for safety prior to the clinician or the caregiver being assigned to a certain patient when it comes to scheduling?
Yeah, absolutely. So home conditions are something that we typically would review and document in our initial intake with any new patient joining the organization. And I think we do have some matching capability based on preferences of our caregivers and our patients, but certainly something that we are focused on continuing to enhance and build out. That care match is so critical. You know, as you think about what's even evolved in the last 2 years, preferences of patients to have vaccinated caregivers, right, is another criteria that we've had to pivot pretty quickly and make sure that we can accommodate and adjust for. So it's continuing to evolve. I'd say we've got a good foundation right now, certainly more work to be done. And I think Rebecca's probably further ahead of us. So she could probably speak to that a little bit more.
Okay.
No, this topic is, obviously it's our wheelhouse at Skedulo. So we do a lot in what we refer to as tags. So basically we use our optimization engine to make sure that, like I said, we have that patient carer match. And we do that by using this concept of tags. So you look at the qualifications a person has, the language preferences, allergies, making sure that anything that's relevant, and also what do they enjoy as a worker? Are they interested in gardening? Are they interested in cooking? Because these are things that people might need support with. So using tags to make sure that that preferences of both worker and patient are taken into consideration in the matching process.
Okay, just a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions or follow-ups for Megan or Rebecca, please ask them now in the Q&A box and we'll try to get to those. Okay, so how do you guys see the clinical talent marketplace changing and what do we need to look at as an industry to find the best talent and attract the best talent?
I think to answer the second part of that question, what we need to look at, in thinking about this topic, I was kind of taken back to my mother and my grandmother are both nurses, and they talk about the reasoning they went into nursing, and it was because it was just easy, because they lived where they trained, they were fed, they didn't have to pay for training, and it was just a natural progression, and that's why we've had such a a high number of nurses in the past. But now there's no incentive for people to go into that work, and I'm definitely not suggesting we should go back to the days where nurses boarded and lived in, but I think there's no incentive. What's the incentive for people to get into this industry right now, other than the fact that they're caring and compassionate people, and this work allows them to express that? But as I mentioned, moral injury. There's people are feeling like they don't have the support to do the job well. So I think there needs to be more incentive. I know in the UK they have a bonus for nursing students of about £5,000 a year, where they're compensated for studying nursing. So I think if we're looking to attract people early, there needs to be a bit more incentive. I think as well, so that's, I guess, more your clinical nursing staff, but then there's a huge workforce that haven't necessarily trained as a nurse but are still so essential, and that's your caregivers and your support workers. And it's very common to have this group of people referred to as unskilled workers, and to me that doesn't encourage people to want to be in an unskilled workforce. And I've been a support worker, I've been a caregiver. It's not unskilled. There is a very unique skill set that goes into this work, and I think this speaks to the fact that there's no professional development, there's no career progression. So why would somebody want to be in this industry? And it does it is viewed as a job rather than a career. I know for myself in the past when, I've been studying, so I've kind of gone into support work or caregiving work, and then it's so easy to walk away from because it's a job, it's not a career. And I think that mindset needs to change, and we need to invest in, again, professional development and professional fulfillment in this space. Yeah, so I think professional development and incentives are going to be a big thing to attract talent.
Megan, anything to add?
Yeah, so I think we have a different set of challenges, right, in the US. So as I think about what's happening in the marketplace, in the labor market, we're actually seeing the highest compensation rates we ever have for our caregivers, and continuously seeing those increasing. But again, it comes back to kind of that market shortage, people choosing different industries or to exit the industry. And when you think about, we have a really large presence, about 34% of the nursing population in the most recent survey is either close to retirement eligible or considering leaving the profession. So we have a potential for a large exodus. And then when you look at nursing program enrollment in the US, that's actually declined year over year for the last 3 years. And not necessarily because there's a lack of interest. We've actually seen an increase in nursing program applicants, but there's a shortage of faculty and staff to take those level of admittances. So we, as we think about what's changing in the marketplace, engaging really early and as industry supporting the educational system to be able to bring more nurses in to support clinical rotations, to offer those early career opportunities. And then, much to Rebecca's point, pivoting from it being just kind of a role focus to the career path, right? And how you can continue to enhance and expand that expertise and find a destination in healthcare, right? And in nursing. So we have slightly different challenges where we're seeing our compensation pivot dramatically, but we're also starting to see that labor market tighten, and we've got to be really proactive in ensuring that we've got an appropriate size of labor pool to support the demands of the American population.
Yeah.
Megan, a question from the audience for you. Does Amedisys have an incentive program for their clinicians? And if yes, has it helped with employer retention?
So we have a number of different incentive programs, and we've tried some things creatively. We definitely are seeing incentives play a role in retention, but specifically around making sure that people are fairly compensated from a base rate is where we see the most significant impact. So doing a lot of constant market analysis, reviewing where the new population coming is versus our tenured population, and making sure we're being proactive there. We also award our clinicians for things like quality and patient care. And so those differentiators also help us with retaining our talent.
Okay, great. And Rebecca, I just want to pull back to a point you made earlier about, the adoption of technology among the caregivers and, how that's going to come over time, and that you need to build trust through that process. What do you think can be done to sort of ease that process along? Because obviously technology is one of the major parts of the future in home healthcare. So what can be done to kind of smooth that process over and make sure that the caregivers are comfortable with what they're being provided with?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I've seen work really well. In any change management, when you're trying to affect change in a large group of people, a top-down approach doesn't always work. So by having a manager or your CIO or someone saying this is what you must do, it doesn't work. So I think what we've seen really well is identifying in the business some key influences, of all age groups, and having them become really confident in the technology, and then supporting their peers. And when their peers see, the benefit that it's offering this person and how much they're getting out of it and how much they're enjoying it, it's a trickle. It trickles down. It impacts, and there's a wave of people kind of embracing it. So I think thinking about your rollout strategies and how you introduce the technology to your workers. So yeah, that top-down approach, it's not very effective. So I identifying key people, and then also providing adequate training. As Megan pointed out before, that there is a a sway to older nursing staff and caregivers who are starting to kind of age out of work, and to give them a piece of technology and say, here you go, go and do your work. It just doesn't work. So I think you need to have appropriate training, support, connection to those key influencers I talked about. They may be even able to help in supporting roles. So yeah, I think just being very mindful about your rollout strategy, how you are going to introduce it, and what you're going to do to train and support the people that are using it.
And Megan, do you guys do stay interviews at all? And if so, has it helped with retention?
Yeah, so we do stay interviews. So that question might be somebody who's heard us speak before. So we, I mentioned earlier that we proactively try to identify risk drivers in our organization for our caregivers. And as part of that, when we identify that one of our caregivers is at high risk, meaning that they've got an elevated risk for turnover in the organization, we actually have a platform that we notify their leadership and provide some coaching and insight and tactics to intervene. And what we have seen is that where we have leader intervention with those folks, we actually see the turnover risk decrease by about 1/3. So it really drives our retention up. But what I would want to say foundationally about that is, while all of that data and analytics is really important to help be able to pinpoint and identify where you might have risk, the most important thing in that is the leadership interaction. And so we have also piloted in other places where we've just pushed for increased leader interaction and foundational leadership development, and really encouraging our leaders to care about that whole caregiver, right? To think about the culture, the employee engagement, the sense of belonging, the satisfaction in the role. And that, more than anything, drives increased retention, more than any financial incentive we can throw on the table. So it is really critical, as you're thinking about retention, that you start with a lens of your leadership capability and where you might need to offer development, training, support to leverage that as a key retention tactic.
And do you guys see, Megan, especially over the last couple of years, with the Great Resignation and everything, is there also turnover on the sales team? Is that something that you guys are dealing with?
We have, it's interesting, we've had some small pockets of increased turnover in our sales organization. And I think, again, a lot of it comes down to that pivoting of the workplace and the Great Resignation. Interestingly, what we saw the most during kind of the last few years is a shift in people moving from our organization to other home health environments, to a shift of people leaving healthcare altogether. And that's the highest concentration that we've seen ever in our organization's history. And I think that's probably true for a lot of healthcare companies out there who monitor that closely. We did have some small incremental increases and have started to see that normalize recently.
And also, Megan, someone wants to know if you can share the platforms you guys utilize for worker retention.
Yeah, so we actually have our own internal homegrown system, and we worked with some consulting firms to develop the initial artificial intelligence around that, but it is a proprietary tool.
Okay, got it. And then Rebecca, in terms of how the work models have changed both in the US and Australia, with deskless and hybrid work models and all that, how will that change things, do you think, in terms of flexible? Organizations I assume will have to become more flexible in terms of when they allow their employees to work, where, etc.
Yeah, so in Australia we have what we call the award, which is basically a set of guiding rules about how often people can work, based on requiring shift breaks and periods of downtime between work. So there's only a certain level of flexibility really that can be afforded. I think that what we will see more and are seeing more is that shift to kind of gig economy and people being attracted more to what we refer to as agency work, because it really, they get to define their own hours. They get paid more. They are still able to achieve that shift pattern in most cases that they want to say, I want to work, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and there's plenty of work out there for them. So it's kind of getting the best of both worlds. I think that we'll see more of, or what I do have seen is different organizations and providers kind of coming together to figure out how they can better support the flow of workers between organizations. So looking at things like skills passports, you know, if you achieve a manual handling certification at one workplace, how can that carry over to other workplaces, so that there's this, you're supporting that kind of gig economy model more, and it's easier for you as employers to then be accepting of that, because historically, if you require a manual handling training, you need to have that for every place of work that you work at. So it's just being a bit more flexible and innovative in the way that we can support workers being out there and working across multiple organizations. But you know, of course, there's still the drive to have your own secure workforce, but the reality is that that's shifting.
Megan, what about you? Obviously, I think it looks like you're at home right now, so things have changed. People, you know, it's always been a remote workforce, but now even the people managing the remote workforce are remote a lot of the time. So how has that changed things? What are the challenges for organizations like Amedisys?
Yeah, so as we think about our clinical population, we've always been kind of highly distributed in the home. And so the shift for us has really been about maximizing and ensuring that we're supporting the culture in the sense of belonging, as we went through a period where kind of our offices and care centers were closed, and really finding different ways to engage with our employee population and heavily leveraging technology platforms to do that. And as we look though to kind of, you know, our core operational or corporate teams, we do see a pivot there as well. So we do have a strong desire of our employee population for blended solutions, increased flexibility, hybrid of in the home and in the office. And so just continuing to make sure that we've got tools and strategies in place that are going to continue to drive that connectivity, that sense of culture and engagement, and that we're balancing all of those components of keeping our workforce engaged.
Okay, fantastic. Well, guys, I think that's all we've got. Megan and Rebecca, thank you so much. This is going to help. You know, I hope this conversation helps a lot of our audience members. And to our audience, thank you for the thoughtful questions. If you have any questions, you can follow up with Skedulo, and also you can follow with me, and I will connect you to them if need be. I'm at Donlan, Donlan at agmedia.com. Otherwise, thanks so much, guys, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.